Hello and welcome to Plant Pod. This is Rob Romej. We've got Makenna Ayres, and we are joined again by Foster and Lauren Pace for our second episode with you guys. How are you guys doing?
Doing
Great. Yeah, it's again just an honor to be here.
Good. So on the last episode, if you didn't hear it, we talked a lot about just what it looks like for someone to live out a kingdom perspective in their lives, what kind of changes there are. And like we had said on the last one, we probably only scratched the surface on some of the things that you guys have done and really just opened up ideas for people. You know, none of what you guys said is something that everyone has to do, but there's so much good value in making sure that you're intentional about the decisions you're doing in your life. And so if you didn't listen to that episode yet and you're just tuning in here, I encourage you to go back and listen to that episode because it was just so great to hear and spend some time with you guys and just kind of figure out why have you made some of those changes. So thank you. Now, about a month ago, we had a GlocalNet training. It was here in town. GlocalNet, if you haven't heard about it before, our church, Aspire Church here in Tucson, is a part of GlocalNet. And that stands for Glocal is global and local. It's this idea of let's gather churches together that all want to seek the kingdom first. Now, our hope, of course, as a Christ follower is that all churches are doing that, right? But what the reality is sometimes churches, especially here in America, what we've noticed is it's kind of easy to maybe focus on church or focus on something else or focus on ministries that are all good things and miss the kingdom. And so we want to get around churches that are going to pretty much do everything they can to focus on the kingdom first. And so this GlocalNet training, it was a 2-day training about a month ago, and you guys came to a 1-day a few months ago, but this was the first time that I think you guys were in an official training like this. And we talked about several things. And so one of the things that is mentioned in there is this KDSC, and it's an abbreviation. And what it stands for, and we've talked about on this podcast, is Kingdom, Discipleship, Society, Church. And we talk in-depthly about each of those topics. So again, if you are tuning in and this is the first time you've really heard some of those things, those other episodes, you can go back. We did a whole series. There's a KDSC series last year. And so you can find that by just looking through our episodes. But what I would love to hear from you guys today, and you too, Makenna, because you've been in so many circles as we talk about this. GlocalNet, we've done Imagine trainings, all about this KDSC stuff. But what kind of things did you guys experience? Were there some new things that you heard? Did God kind of use that? So now that we're a month removed, how are you guys doing and what did God show you during that training?
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely really great to have this this training to sort of create a paradigm shift for us about what is church, what is the kingdom, what is my role in all of that. I think that we've kind of been in a church culture, in Christian culture, American Western culture of church that has kind of veered from like the original essence and purpose that Jesus had in calling us his church. And so I feel like for me, understanding that or hearing that has kind of changed my understanding of my place in the church, that I am the church. You know, Foster kind of alluded to that in this previous episode, that like our marriage, our family, like is a pocket of the church. It's not an event to attend on Sunday mornings. It's much bigger than that. God's kingdom is much bigger than I had a box that I kind of put it into. And so I think my mind has just been open to really the vastness and the depth of the Lord's kingdom and opportunity to participate in it.
Yeah.
Did you have anything, Foster, that really maybe one or two high-level things that stood out to you from the training?
Yeah, I think what I appreciated, one was just first the structure of KDSC. You know, so you've got the kingdom, and disciples, society, and the church. And so one thing I liked that he said is society is kind of not either the canvas or the grid, that's like it's the world. So we are there, like, society is all around us, it's everywhere. And we're trying as disciples, like our goal is to follow Jesus and therefore spread the kingdom across society, right? And so if you kind of think about like just either a wave or something just, washing over, like especially in Tucson, as you watch the monsoon storms just kind of start, and you're standing there and you're watching the cloud just blow towards you, and you can see the wall of rain. So it's like just kind of I liked the reason I like the structure, because it lends itself to like that imagery and understanding, because I think sometimes when we don't understand in a way that is intuitive to us, we can lose hold to why we're doing that thing. And so when we look around and we see society, and we're meant to follow Jesus and be a part of that like storm cloud that's just starting to spread in rainwater or life across society. And so as disciples, then we grow in the church, and the church then is like kind of the is really where the kingdom lands, across society. And it's people. It's not, those people do have resources that might include a building sometimes, or for us, we meet in a school, but that's not the church. The church is the people. So after that, you can kind of imagine just like, you've got Tucson, you've got people walking around the streets, and there's a monsoon in one area, and it's just spreading across the city, hopefully to envelop the whole city and bring us some sweet rain, just to, and in that image, it's like what we're kind of, and then, there's life across the whole city, right? When the water, falls.
Yeah, it's a good image.
That's kind of, I feel like I was kind of dropped to me while we were sitting in there, because he just explained it in a way where, it was like, hey, the society's the grid, we are, the kingdom is the message, that Jesus preached. He didn't, he preached that we are saved, that we have eternal life as a part of his kingdom, like, so the kingdom, and that, he literally says the kingdom is here, so like he's announcing it. So just kind of like Lauren said, trying to change our perspective on that, and like having that as to redefine how we're thinking about the concepts of church, our concept of like how we engage society, like we talk about engaging society, we're already there, like we're already in it, and sometimes we, like one thing that that just made so much sense, he's like, sometimes we leave society, go back into our church bubble, like that the church domain that we've created, and then try to engage society.
Yeah.
And it's so counterintuitive.
Yeah.
When we're already there, we're already interacting with it.
Doesn't really make much sense.
And we already have we all have a God-given, work. We all have God-given work of some sort that helps us, and experiences that help us engage the society around us.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
One of the questions I have for you guys, so as I think about our church, first and foremost, like we are very blessed to be a part of a church that is really trying to seek the kingdom first. Now, we don't have it all figured out, right? It's not like we're perfect in this, but we really, I feel blessed to be a part of a church that's the focus. We're blessed to have a pastor, a senior pastor in Brian Hook, that really, that's all that we're trying to do. And so what that looks like for us is sometimes we are doing things a little bit different than other churches. Now, I'm not trying to compare and contrast, but we just might look a little bit different at times. And we know that because people who come and join our church will even sometimes say things, right? Like we all kind of, like you talked about bringing baggage on the last episode, we bring something. This
Yeah.
is how I grew up with my church environment. And so we come with expectations of these ministries need to be here, these things need to be in place, all of this other stuff. And our church might feel like, what is different about this? And my question to you guys is now that, so you were a part of Aspire from the beginning. You've been a part of it before it even launched on Sunday mornings and when it just started in small groups. Does going through this kind of training bring some sort of value or kind of start to make some sense with some of the things that our church is doing? And I'm thinking about those in our church body who haven't been a part of this training. And if they did have the opportunity to be a part of it, like what kind of benefits are there by going through this that start to make more sense? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think really since the beginning, like being able to join Aspire when we first moved out here, we're just married. I had the hope of joining a church that had a young married Sunday school and just kind of like was established, like Aspire was just not, it just wasn't established. And so I initially had this.
There was no even Sunday morning
There
when
wasn't,
you started.
or women's group even. The small groups were for men, which I think was a great way to start. But I also just was like, okay, well, whoever wants to come hang out with me while Foster goes to small group,
And the first women's small group was started. Yeah. Literally. Yeah. That's how it happened.
No, but I think having the opportunity to mature with the church has been really a huge blessing in our own personal life and story. But everything that in this framework that has been, taught in this training is the DNA of our church. It really is. And it started, Brian had this coming into, hey, this is how we're going to do things. And so I think about Brian also just having like moments of like, God, this feels impossible, like planning a church in the foothills of Tucson, and this is impossible. And God just kind of speaking to him like, but like with me, anything is possible. Like it is possible, and it's going to be different than sometimes like the formulated church framework that we have in Western society. And so I think like being able to experience the difference where when we say like church is not an event to attend, but a family to belong to, when you experience belonging to the family, you don't care. I don't care that we have to set up every Sunday, because I'm part of a family that am experiencing the blessing of that. And so the event of Sunday morning church it's fine. However, we're able to gather, I'm willing to do that because I have that experience of relationship in community and family. And so it's like a great word to tagline, but like to have the experience of its truth is really honestly profound. And one thing I'm just looking at my notes from the training is just the power of the kingdom is agreement and not numbers. So I think that's like a paradigm shift that I'm like our church plant isn't huge, like it hasn't skyrocketed, but there's so much depth to our church that we don't need to look at the metrics of numbers. Like the kingdom there's strength in the kingdom because of the agreement that we have as a family, and then also just the reconciliation that's pursued within the family as well. And so anyways, I think just kind of being able to speak to like experiencing the depth of that truth has really been pivotal for my maturing as a Jesus follower, and it's been a blessing to be with Aspire on this journey.
Yeah. I think one thing that I reflected on while I was at the training, right? You're talking about who is this for? And so obviously it was the Global Net training is specifically targeted to church planners for the most part, right? But we kind of were brought in as, domain leaders, right? Is kind of the category that Brian's opening it up. But I think, like, as I was sitting there just reflecting on the training, I think those are still, if you will, priority people to be training in that. Because really what the KDSC is all about is, again, like we talked about in the last podcast, just briefly, is letting God define the kingdom. And like in the subsequent concepts, like in the kingdom, we have the church, which is the people who are disciples, they're followers of Jesus, and how do we then engage society? And that's for everybody, really and truly. So if you want to reach everybody with that reminder, you better start with the people who are actively in this moment about to plant churches, because if they are kind of planting in the American church context, then from the, like, what we've kind of grown to see, at least, if not just neutral, maybe even sometimes unhelpful, where it's like, hey, I go to church, I am the church, right? Where it's a building and an event, and as opposed to, we say at Aspire, not an event to attend, but a family to belong to. Which, so at the core of that is relationship. We Abide, Connect, Share is all relationship. That's the focus. And so then you start to see this overwhelming new kind of, or not necessarily new, but like renewed, what I would say. Because a lot of churches do focus on relationship, but it's just kind of a right ordered, sense of relationship.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Of like, guys, if we're fighting about a building, then we've completely lost sight, like because, Rob and Foster being unified is the goal. Like, that's what Jesus wants. Like, when Jesus says his called out ones, right? It's not his called out building to gather in, but so if we're arguing about that, then we're missing the relationship that Jesus wants us to have. And so how much of that is just unpacked and kind of, again, refreshed, renewed vision for that, like a reminder of what's important, what the no kidding core values of a gathering of believers should be in a city.
That's good.
And that's for everybody.
Yeah.
But you want the people who are going to be teaching it to be on track too.
To your point, a lot of times the Global Net training that we've done, it has been geared towards church planters, and something that sort of happened this past time is we recognize, and especially in Aspire, but all Global Net churches, like, it's not just the pastors aren't super special and they have all of the wisdom. Like, we as a body get to engage society, and we come together in our small groups as well as our large groups to sit under the Word of God, sit around the Word of God, to be encouraged by one another. So it all of a sudden changes why we do those things, but really the people matter. The domain leaders is what we call them, which is like you guys, being there. Maybe you'll plant a church in the future, but the intent was, let's get some domain leaders that are living out in society, that live on Davis Mountain, that work, they're part of the Air Force or whatever, just domain leaders, and how can this make an impact in them as well? Makenna, I'd love to hear from you too. So you've kind of come into some of these trainings in a little bit different way. You've been a part of it over the past year and a half. And you kind of started shortly after you moved out here, I think, from California, and you started joining our church. What kind of things has God showed you by going through and sitting in some of this training? And what kind of, maybe there's also some things that you were already wrestling with that were confirmed through this training?
Yeah, no, that's good. I know we've talked about these kinds of things in the first season of Plant Pod, and I think they're worth repeating. But as someone who came from a very entrenched American church framework, and really wrestling with that for a while. And Nathan and I praying about what next steps would look like, feeling very stagnant and honestly kind of stuck, but not having the words to describe what we wanted different, or what that would look like to be a part of a church that is different. And again, I'll just go on the record and say I love our previous church. I love where we grew up. I'll always love them. But it's just a very different context. And so coming here, and for reference, I've talked about, I in school, I studied theology, and one of my professors is friends with Brian, and so that's how we got connected here. When we found out we were going to move here, I asked him about churches, and he mentioned Brian. Anyways, so then coming here and immediately recognizing this is so radically different than what we're used to, and getting invited to have coffee with Brian, like our second week here, and being like, what? Like, the senior pastor wants to talk to us, like he wants to know who we are.
What did we do wrong?
Serious, right? I'm like, this is crazy. All of that to say, though, it just was so noticeably different. And I think that comes, I think the reason KDSC is so helpful is it brings clarity to kind of the way that this all plays out based on how we see the template in scripture. And so the reason it is KDSC is the order is significant there. In so many ways, it builds upon itself, and one link is contingent upon the other to function, I think, in a healthy way. And so I was so used to starting with C, like church is the focus. It's all about the church, and specifically my church. Like, what is my church doing? How is my church the best church ever? And the focus was very rarely on the kingdom. And so starting with that, because Jesus asks us to, tells us to seek first the kingdom, truly everything else falls into place. And I've heard Brian say so many times, if you start with the kingdom, you'll get the church, which is oftentimes what so many of us are seeking first. And it's don't worry, you start with the kingdom and then you'll get the church. And so I think it just brings a lot of clarity to how this all plays out in practicality, and just on a personal level, it has brought, to your point, Lauren, so much depth that I don't even think we could have imagined, not having been in it, and now having been here about 2 years and being very steeped in that. It is so much better. It just brings, it brings so much life, and the community aspect, which is the church, is radically different in just really incredible ways. So we're really grateful to be a part of it. And I think, with this recent training and kind of the inclusion of domain leaders, that's really how we make any kind of lasting impact in our city. We've talked about city church, what that looks like, and to be able to, and we, talked about eternal purposes too, and all of that coming in, reconciling all things. The Lord is reconciling all things to himself, and we get to partner with him in that, in bringing reconciliation in our pockets of influence. And so I think that's kind of the whole reason we started this podcast, right? Is just bring clarity to some of these things. It can feel like there's so many different things. And Rob, on the last episode, you were talking about, sometimes it feels like a list and there's all these different things. And in reality, it's simple. When we are seeking first the kingdom, everything else falls into place. Yeah. And it genuinely is simple.
It's a great way
despite,
to put it.
There's lots of things. It doesn't mean that it's not multifaceted, right? We talk about the manifold wisdom of God and what that looks like, and what it means to be his church and partner with him, and the things that he's doing in our lives individually and in our society and our churches. But it does boil down pretty nicely, and it's simple. And I think that makes it so meaningful and so engaging. So I don't know, that was kind of all over the place, but there's so
that's
many things
helpful.
that I love about it that have really shaped kind of my understanding of all of it.
Well, it's not it is complex, but it's not complicated. You know,
Right.
not
That's a good way to
try
put it.
Yeah, it's just it is simple, but it's very intricate, right? As you guys are members of Aspire Church, do you think that would this be valuable for other people within Aspire Church to go through this kind of training?
Absolutely. Yeah.
And why? Like what kind of things come to mind? Why do you say that so quickly?
Yeah. Just to help you, like, so often we just wake up, maybe have a quiet time, go, for some of us, just work away all day, and can kind of put that in a box of work, and then come home, we've got our family box, and then, so it's like, okay, let's gather our family together let's gather our family around the dinner table, right? Not a bad thing, but like, we put that in the family box. We do that for 5 days. We go maybe have fun somewhere on Saturday, like, and this is what I'm just saying, like what we found ourselves doing, really, right?
Is there like a fun box kind of thing?
Yeah, so you've got like like let's go have fun. Maybe friends fit into Saturday, and then Sunday church, and maybe if you're really spiritual, you have a small group, throughout the week, right? That's great. But so, like, because a lot of churches do have that situation. There's a lot of people who do live in that reality, and it's not unhelpful to have those things. But just when you shift, and now we are part of the kingdom, we're kingdom citizens, then everything else, okay, now I'm living in a domain. I'm a part of the kingdom, so my family isn't just like, a container. They're part of the kingdom too. And so who else needs to be around the dinner table tonight? Who else is a part of the kingdom or needs to be part of the kingdom that I can invite to my dinner table? So it kind of just changes, like it literally changes the lens with which you view the world. And that seems simple, and it is simple. And so for some people, it may be just like, polishing, kind of just scrubbing the lenses like a little bit. But I think it's helpful, for some of us, we need new glasses with which to view the world, and some of us just need them cleaned. But all of us need to hear and remember the gospel, the good news that the kingdom of the God is here in and through the person of Jesus Christ, and that impacts every moment of the rest of our lives now and like continuing. So that is, like, I guess at its core why I would say yes, like everybody needs it. My first thought when I went through it was like, how could I make this not like a Sunday school, but just like a consistent, like I say training, but like it needs to be part of your discipleship. When you meet with someone you're discipling, it needs to be inherent when you're inviting people who don't know Jesus into the kingdom. I mean, accurately represent the kingdom. Don't say like, explain salvation as a part of bringing you into God's family, the people he has like brought for himself, that you're seeking him, so
yeah.
It should change everything about how we talk, because then we won't miss. We'll always struggle in representing it. Just like succinctly explain the Trinity. Okay, yeah, that's there's always difficulties with language in this life, but I think it's kind of going through the mental exercise, and then even like the practical exercise at the end of the training of planting a church, is what we did, made us think about how we are going to talk to people. And I think that makes you think about, well, like, what is this whole thing that we're doing called, the kingdom? So that's why I would say absolutely anybody needs to go through that kind of training. But it shouldn't, like, if we just put it in and hear me out, if we just put it in a training box, where does that training box exist? Within a church domain,
Yeah.
maybe, you know?
Well, so you just touched on something that I'm wrestling with, right? So
Yeah.
I'm thinking, and I've gotten the pleasure to sit around these contexts and be around people like Bob Roberts, Omar Reyes, Brian Hook, and so many other people, Haydn, and they're teaching these things. And man, do they have just like the capacity to see things like from hundreds of thousands of feet kind of thing, right? And I'm like, I'm just in the trees here, like barely floating. And so it's been cool to be a part of it. But I go to what you're talking about. It's like, man, what if every member of our church, not as well as other churches, but let's just boil it down to like Aspire Church. Man, what if every member like knew that this is what we were all about? And now it is, you said it, like this KDSC stuff is the DNA of our church. So it's there, whether you see it or don't see it, it's there. And it's not something that we bring up all the time because like, that'll just take all of our conversations all the time, right? But man, how do you train? Because that's kind of hard. And I don't have the answer for that yet, but I would love for our whole church to know and go through this and in what context that looks like. So I don't know if it's so much a question, but maybe you guys have some ideas or thoughts on like how that's helpful. Because I think obviously we can do a training, but like we did 2 days and we had to kind of jam it in there because you can't just talk about kingdom and miss discipleship, society, church. You can't just pick one of these. And so this is a long conversation. Getting people to buy into a 2-day training, let alone you want to spread that over 4 weeks or however, like you kind of lose people, right? So like, I don't know, how do we train, show, disciple this? Once our church knows it, I could see how it goes, but how do we start? I don't know if you have any thoughts.
I was just thinking about, Jesus had many followers, but 12 disciples. His metric for success was not found in numbers, but in depth. And, the more that you can equip a handful of people maybe to have a thorough not only understanding, but there's fruit in their life from how this material changes them. And I even say material, it's all scripture. It's all like, but having like a depth of that. And then when we're talking about our church being relational, that church is relationships. It's not an event. That there's a lot of opportunity to then have kind of, even to your point of discipleship, of equipping your core and then allowing that to grow, based off of their relationships with other members.
I think, and just a question that arose out of that I think you hit on, is how did Jesus teach this? Because practically, like, I think there is not just a lot, but a fundamental, we are of the discipled line of people. Like someone has told someone who has told someone who has told someone about the gospel. And so we are here. And Jesus was the first one to preach it. So how did he do it? We can look at scripture and see that. And so I think that's, what do you guys see in that? Like, what do you see Jesus doing in how he taught it?
Yeah, I know I personally kind of walked away from that experience of like, I have personal work to do in my understanding of the kingdom. And, it's also just brought up, like when Jesus talks about the kingdom of God, it's a lot of times in parables because of the complexity of it. Yeah. And so it's not something that's, we would love for it to be neat and packageable and easy to distribute.
Come for an hour, you got it figured out.
Right, here you go. You open up your box and you're good, right? But that's like the whole framework, church framework that we're kind of fighting against. And so I think anyways, there's personal work for us to do as individuals, and encouraging our our body to do that work, I think is important. And then connecting through small groups, but outside of that, really it's like living life together. When I think about, again, like the disciples, like they lived, ate, slept, traveled, walked with Jesus. And that is how they learned about who he was. And, you know, I think about just the opportunity that McKenna and I have right now, where she comes over every Tuesday and spends all day with us. And we're able to eat, play, you know, rest, talk. Like, there's this idea of like organic life together, and a building up of one another, that, you know, there's a personal responsibility, but also just like in community encouragement that happens. But I think another important thing too that was also just brought up in the training is like if you start with the wrong essence or the wrong why,
The wrong view of God.
the wrong view of God, the further you go on that path, like the worse
Church gets,
you become, because you are missing out on what the why, you know? And so I think like really starting with that question of that why and that what, so that we don't branch down the wrong path for, you know.
It's good.
Yeah.
One of the biggest things that just like sticks out to me is in this, like, looking back on men and women, you know, who showed me what the kingdom was. Some of the names that just like stick out is Cameron and Krista Lane, like, who literally opened their home. You know, I was friends with their son, Colin, and they opened their home, and I was over there all the time, you know, but I watched them live out the kingdom, you know, and a principle that sticks out about that, and something that I see in scripture, is spending time with people. Like, there's something about that we can't get away from, even though we try, you know. Like in the American context, you know, it's like, just need some me time, you know, just need, you know, like we say all sorts of stuff, you know. And it's not to say that you do need solitude, time alone with God. But Jesus literally lives with people for several years, like, and you do see him go up on a mountaintop and disappear for a little bit and get some time with God, but then he comes back and spends, you know, weeks, months, and just years with people. And I think so often we try to get away from that, and just try to, you know, break away and spend time to ourselves. Whereas if we really truly, like, the people I look back on that really impacted me as just showing me what the kingdom was like, were just extremely generous and with their time. Now, they had times where it was like, no, this is just a family now, you know. Sorry, but you do have a house, you do have a bed, like, you know. But yeah, I think when we look at like how Jesus did it, you're able to love people when you're around them. And so if you only spend an hour and a half to 2 hours on Sunday morning, and then an hour and a half one day of the week in small group, you do not have the time to live out the one another's, you know. And so that's where I encourage small groups to explore what it means to live out the one another's. You know, when someone says, you know, I need prayer for this, well, like, can you meet up and pray other times in the week together? You know, do just two of you just need to grab coffee, you know, and encourage each other at some point out like in the week, you know, can like, you know, McKenna's not in our small group, but you guys have, like, Nathan's even like shows up when it's still 4:30 and you're hanging out and it's like, hey, let's just all have dinner tonight. Those things happen naturally, and I think it's just an opportunity to love one another. And then out of that, we can even invite people in to those situations now who don't know Jesus. And how much more, one of the things that did stick out to me was just Bob Roberts talking about, like, yeah, people like when you just like try to go street preach, or as I've done many times, you show up on a mission trip and you go door to door knocking and you're like, hey, I just want to, like, tell you about hope in Jesus Christ, or one of the 30 other different phrases I've tried to get through the door with, right? There's no investment there. Those people don't know you. Sometimes there are situations in which that's good, and listen to the Spirit, and don't put him in a box. Don't ever put the Spirit in a box. However, I think we oftentimes put him in that box of, I need to go somewhere to tell people, rather than I need to invite people into my home and tell them. And so that's kind of, because when you invite them in, usually you're feeding them a lot of times, and they already feel loved, and then you're able to ask them how you're doing, live life alongside them. They see the mess, but then they also see the love of Christ lived out. And so that's where, like the last podcast, I used the example of a fortress, like God is the fortress, but like a marriage, you now have an opportunity to be like an outpost together of the kingdom, and God will, you can open up the resources that he's given you. That was another thing he talks about, is look at your own resources as opposed to others' needs. You have resources to bless other people in the kingdom, the church, and then to invite other people in, so your home, your food, your money, like all of that is a resource that you can spend on other people. So that's where, I just feel like, man, how much could all of this change
if we're all on the same page with this, right?
If we all understand that,
that's good.
And it won't happen by just trying to do it 3 hours or less a week.
Yeah. No, that's good. That's really good.
That is good. I was just going to say too, I feel like something I'm compelled to bring up too is, in like to your original question of like, how do we get this out there? Like, how do we get starting just with Aspire, our church, and then moving forward, and then, looking at what Jesus did. I think sometimes the temptation is like, Lauren, you talked about getting that core group, which I think is right on the money. I think sometimes the temptation in churches is like to pick all of the people with a certain gift or inclination, like leadership, apostleship, and then letting them kind of disperse it. No, we see Jesus calling disciples that are so different from each other, like could not be more opposite sides of the spectrum for their context. And yet, like, they all had to do life together and had to live together and eat together, and then were sent out together. And we don't know for sure, but I like to think that like maybe Jesus sent out the ones together that were like polar opposites, right? I feel like that'd be a very Jesus thing to do, is like to pair up people, that are completely opposite. And so I think in kind of disseminating this throughout a church, we can't just be like, okay, these people are really gifted leaders, and so we're going to make sure they're trained up and then send them out to kind of disperse it to everyone else. I think we have to be intentional in like, who are people with different giftings and inclinations, and how can we get them to partner with one another and then go spread that out, because people learn differently and experience things differently. And if it's all coming from like a singular focus or perspective, whether or not the intention was that way to begin with, I think things can get missed. And so I think Jesus was very intentional with the people that he called to follow them, and was very intentional in calling different kinds of people, like to give, like, it's just crazy when we think about it, right? I think sometimes we miss that. And I feel like I missed that for so long, and just read, the names of the disciples, were like, cool, great. And they all followed Jesus. And then just learning more about these backgrounds, like to have a tax collector and a zealot, like eating, living, breathing together, that's crazy. Like, genuinely, that is so crazy. And so anyways, all that to say, I just think it's worth noting, like, I don't know, I think diversity has become like this bad word in a lot of circles, and like the kingdom is so diverse and it's beautiful. And when we embrace that instead of trying to like shy away from it or change it into something, I think we miss that beauty. And I think we miss the efficacy of the gospel being disseminated through people who are different from one another, but are all united in the common goal of following Jesus, becoming more like him, and glorifying him for all of their days.
Yeah. Well, I think on that point, we need to reconcile the word diversity for what it really is, and just be reminded of what the actual definition is. And, as I listen to you guys, some of the things you guys are saying is kind of scary. If you're listening to this, you're thinking like, hold on, it's actually not that hard when you go on a mission to share the gospel with someone that you're never going to see again. Because if it goes poorly, it goes poorly. You don't ever have to face them again. But it's really scary to share with your neighbor.
Yeah.
And then if it does go poorly, you have to see them again tomorrow when you wake up and go outside, or invite them into your home and be vulnerable and open up. Like, what if this, I don't know, what if they get mad? What if it goes bad? What if it takes 5 years? What if nothing ever happened? Like, that's hard. That's really, really hard. Or
Yeah.
It is.
as you're talking to McKenna about the diversity, you're like, hold on, you mean I have to be in a room? I mean, I love them, they're a part of our church, but maybe you think of someone who's like, they are so different than me, and I don't even know what I would say, and you want me to go out with that person, like that's hard. These are hard things. And so I'm reminded that just sounds like Jesus though too, because if you think about the other side of that coin, it's also really beautiful, like when you're talking about the diversity of even the disciples, and or what could happen when you engage in a relationship long term with a neighbor, someone that you see at the gym all the time, or a coworker. Well, there's a lot of beauty that can happen, but there's also a lot of pain. But all that to say, I really appreciate your guys' insights. I think it sounds like the training has, from what I've gathered, maybe affirmed some things that you guys, were thinking through, processing, but maybe also sounds like God is showing you guys some things too. So thank you guys for all of your insights. I don't know if anybody had anything else that you wanted to share before we close out the podcast as we near the end.
I just had one thought as you were speaking, Rob, about pursuing, again, kind of going back to pursuing relationships, and it's not like that I have an agenda for my neighbor. It's that I'm ready to show them the love of Christ and allow that to speak to them in a way. And when the opportunity comes to be specific about the words that I say about his gospel, but to be living an authentic expression of his love towards people can take a lot of the pressure of doing, of doing all the right things, remembering this list of things that we've talked about, and you have to do all of them and don't forget anything, and really just like resting in his presence, in his leading, and being an authentic expression of that, which I think also just means like you don't have to be perfect.
Yeah.
You know,
It's good.
And we're not. We're not perfect.
Be real about it. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm like, we're not capable of perfection. And even that speaks to the authenticity of relating with the Lord and inviting others people to have that relationship with him too.
Yeah, and once you've kind of changed the lens you're viewing, like you still the goal is to abide in God, to seek him, and then he will change your heart for your neighbor. You won't be like pursuing them out of obligation. Your heart will start to break for people who are lost. Your heart will start to, you just grieve when you see someone in the church who's hurting, and then God says, don't hold back when, don't hold me back when you see that. Go, he sends us into that. So yeah, it sounds like a lot, but when you just focus on him, he leads you. And that's the easiest thing ever.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that you mentioned lens a couple times. So as a church, we're going through the Sermon on the Mount, and we've been doing that since the beginning of the year. And it's just really reflected so much on just the conversations we're having. Like when we talk about having a kingdom perspective, that's exactly what we're talking about. And, I'm actually preparing for the sermon this coming Sunday, and I don't mean to divulge all of the sermon, but one of the analogies I thought about using was having like glasses, like a kingdom lens. And here you keep talking about lens. I don't know if my pride should come out and I should be like, hey, that was my idea, Foster. Or maybe that's just the Spirit confirming this is a good way to think about it, right? Like
maybe there's a spirit that we share here.
There is. I think you're onto something. But I just, all that to say, I think it's a good way to look at it. And for anybody listening, I've personally been spending, I didn't intend for this, but last year I started reading the Sermon on the Mount, parts of it every day. And then as a church, we just happened to decide to do the Sermon on the Mount, and that wasn't connected. So for me personally, I've been reading through the Sermon on the Mount for about a year now on a daily basis. And I feel like God's showing me something every single day. I'm like, wow, how is this possible? I'm just rereading the same thing. But I say that to say it's a great place to spend a lot of time in. If you can't overread it, you can't talk about it enough. You could say that about so much in Scripture, but what Jesus has here in the Sermon on the Mount has been really good. So thank you guys for sharing your insights and your experiences with everything with GlocalNet, and just appreciate what you have to share, and we'll see what we can do about training the rest of our church. But thank you guys again for joining us today.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank